Magi, in Unamagi, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people who called this land home long before the arrival of settlers and who to this day still call it home. Welcome everyone to the second in a series of panel discussions entitled Violence and Harassment in Politics. I'll start the evening by framing up the series and how it came to be. My name is Kacy. Hello. I was the initial instigator for this series. I had been grappling with whether or not to reoffer for a second term in municipal politics, whether or not I should run, what it would mean for my family, work-life balance. I was feeling very exhausted from the past 4 years in local political life. It can be very taxing for women and especially for others with multiple layered identities. So I reached out to local women's organizations in my area and told them what I was feeling and how gender-based violence had affected me and my work. And I was met with instant connection and rolling up of sleeves and everybody asking, how can we help? And that was honestly a very large factor in why I decided to reoffer. I'm sure we've all observed these broader issues, trolls, threats, rhetoric, misogyny, gender imbalance in many, many spheres, not just that of politics. There are many communities that are very affected by this: women, marginalized communities, LGBTQIA, Two-Spirit, people of different ethnic backgrounds and so forth. And what we're noticing is that in the world of today, people feel more and more emboldened to make whatever comments they wish about what we wear, how we look, how our bodies inhabit the world. And these behaviors, they don't only come from the public, they come from within, from colleagues, other elected officials, from staff. Misogyny in politics also mirrors general society and workplaces, and this seems to be on the increase. I'd also like to say that we're also sometimes our own worst critics, and imposter syndrome is an old friend of mine, so the language that we use to describe ourselves is also something that's relevant here. In our last panel, it was noted that there are very few structures for support and resolutions in the political sphere. One of our panelists, T.R.A.N., mentioned that there was no structured workplace sexual harassment and violence policy within Parliament. They were all considered independent workers. Vitriol and threats and negative language can prompt people to leave politics prematurely, and this compromises our democracy. So if we want equity in all orders of leadership, the first essential step is ensuring that we have parity in these structures. In this era of Me Too, following the Mass Casualty Commission report, we need to be even more active in making sure that this is something that we can eradicate. I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in this panel series. They've all been eager and expert partners in co-hosting this series with us. Last time we heard about we heard from the authors of Gender-Based Violence in Canadian Politics in the Me Too Era, T.R.A.N. and Cheryl Collier. And you'll have noticed on the poster and other literature for this that there are a whole host of community-based organizations, elected folks, and many other people who have been involved in this series. So in our second panel, we want to speak specifically about the Nova Scotia context and how it affects us. Our panelists have a wealth of experience in office and in their communities. They will speak about their own experiences and the challenges and opportunities for ensuring diversity and equity and a truly representative government. In terms of housekeeping, please remain on mute while panelists are speaking. There are two people monitoring the chat, so please put your questions there. This session is being recorded. A link along with a resource list will go out following the conclusion of the panel. We'll facilitate and manage this event to ensure a respectful environment and discourse and keep us on track and on time. We ask for your cooperation and please forgive us if anything goes awry. We are disabling video and audio for the beginning of this event due to a recent experience of being Zoom bombed with graphic material. We will enable the chat a bit further down the line to allow for comments and questions. My supper just got delivered by my 6-year-old. Thank you very much, sweetheart. I'm going to turn it over to Allison Smith, my colleague and friend on council here in the municipality of the District of Lunenburg, to introduce the moderator and our panelists, of which I'm one. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everybody. It is my honor to introduce our panelists for tonight. The first is Senator Dr. Wanda Thomas Bernard. Senator Bernard is the first African Nova Scotian woman to be appointed to the Senate of Canada, beginning in 2016 to present, representing the province of Nova Scotia and her hometown of East Preston. Senator Bernard champions issues impacting African Canadians and people living with disabilities. She is particularly invested in human rights, employment equity, and mental health. Through her involvement in community projects, her social work career, her time with Dalhousie School of Social Work, and now her work in the Senate, Senator Bernard has maintained a deep dedication to social justice and racial justice. She was awarded the Order of Canada in 2005 and the Order of Nova Scotia in 2014. Senator Bernard advocates for reparations for the historical and continued anti-Black racism impacting the lives of African Canadians. Next, we have Mica Daurie. Mica Daurie is a 2S LGBTQIA+ community advocate and thought leader with years of experience in spaces like government, public service, legal and legislative services, corporate services, event planning, and a wealth of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Mica has smashed glass ceilings as the first openly transgender woman to work at Halifax City Hall, the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and more. She approached the idea of opening T.R.A.N.S after a difficult few years of watching swaths of hate against the two-spirit, trans, gender non-conforming community run rampant cross-country. She was forced to step away from a planned municipal run in politics in 2024 due to the risk of violence and hate. Next, we have Pam Lovelace. Pam Lovelace is a former deputy mayor and councillor for the Halifax Regional Municipality. She represented Halifax on local, regional, and national boards and committees, including the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities and Canadian Urban Transit Association. Pam teaches in the local government program at Dalhousie University and is a dedicated community volunteer with many different organizations, receiving the Volunteer of the Year awards from both Halifax and the province of Nova Scotia, the Canada 150 sesquicentennial pin. I knew I was going to struggle with that. And Minister of Veteran Affairs Commendation. Pam has contributed to many groups, including Community Farm Markets, Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, Women in Film and Television Atlantic, Equal Voice Canada, Friends of Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes, Nova Scotia Resettlement Society, and more. Next, we have Heidi Marshall. Heidi Marshall is an elder, knowledge keeper, and language warrior from Member 2 First Nation. She is a professor at Cape Breton University, owner of Mazel Advisory and Consulting Services, and president of the Mi'kmaq Circle of Hope Society. She has been involved with the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, run campaign schools for Indigenous women, and was one of the founding members of the Jane Paul Indigenous Women's Resource Center in Cape Breton. Next, we have Kacy Peterson DeLong. Kacy is in her second term as a councillor in the municipality of the district of Lunenburg. She chose to run in 2020 because of the societal instability and polarization she was witnessing in the midst of pandemic lockdowns, Nova Scotia's mass shooting, and climate breakdown. Kacy loves building solutions on the local level and working with her community, bringing the creativity of a NASCA degree and hard work to all she does. Kacy was lead organizer for an innovative South Shore Sustainability Summit in 2023 and was instrumental in the municipality of the District of Lunenburg becoming the first and so far only municipality in Nova Scotia to declare gender-based violence an epidemic. Building intersectional equity is a North Star in her work as a consultant, politician, and mother. And lastly, we have Sue Bookchin, our moderator for the evening. Sue has had a varied career with degrees in nursing and public health from Columbia University and worked in healthcare, nonprofits, and the private sector in organizational development as a facilitator, coach, mediator, leadership trainer, and also a stained glass artist. That was a new fact for me, Sue. She is going into her 10th year as executive director and co-founder of Be the Peace Institute, a feminist, intersectional, community-based nonprofit dedicated to addressing gender-based violence at its roots in systemic patriarchy, misogyny, colonialism, and the supremacy of whiteness, and how we unseat these foundations to achieve peace, equity, and social justice for women, youth, and gender diverse people of all races, cultures, and social locations. Sue represented Be the Peace Institute as a participant on the Mass Casualty Commission inquiry and is committed to any ways we can work together to implement the recommendations and move the needle on eradicating gender-based violence in all forms. And that is our panel for this evening. What a group. I will now turn it over to Sue.
Thanks so much, everybody, and I am delighted and honored to be in your company. We have a format that we're using for this where we've designed some questions, and so I'll pose a question and ask all the panelists to speak to it. Wanda needs to leave for a vote shortly, so we'll have her answer first and then the rest of you, and then I'll pose another question and you can all answer. We'll take questions from the audience. People can put their questions in the chat. So we have had recent elections, municipal elections, provincial election. We're soon to have a federal election. There are band council elections, and we have witnessed an election in the US historic in the fact that a narcissistic, misogynistic, racist, convicted felon now has risen to the top job in the land. How do you see this moment in Nova Scotia, given all of those things? Are we in a time that is more racist, more homo and transphobic, or misogynist? What has been your experience? Senator Wanda, would you start us off?
I'm afraid I won't be able to start because the bells are ringing.
Oh,
And it's a 15-minute bell, and so it's too distracting for me to even try to speak.
okay.
So I'll continue listening, but in 5 minutes I need to disappear, do that vote. I'm going to leave everything set up here, and I'll be back
And you'll
to
come
join
back.
you as soon as I can. It's wonderful to be here with such a panel.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Senator. So maybe we'll go to Mica.
Certainly, yeah. I think it's going to really test the quote Canadian values of kindness and equality for all that we've come to know to be a standard across Turtle Island, Canada, specifically here in Mi'kmaq. We're known as being very kind, being accepting of others, and I think that the recent election is going to put those values to the test. I know for myself, the old adage of the frog in the pot has felt very real recently as a gender nonconforming trans woman. Myself, I have felt the temperature rise around me. And, I think in the Nova Scotia context, we have a, progressive conservative party here, and they have, recently kind of affirmed their support for two-spirit transgender nonconforming folks. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming years and whether a shifting political climate towards a kind of more extremist rhetoric on a larger scale is going to affect that and is going to affect the comfortability of people to bring challenges to people's humanity. I always love to say that people are not politics. I know myself, I have felt being the tail end of that very much recently. So I think in the Nova Scotia context specifically, it is going to test the kind of climate that we have here. We've always had kind of a seedy underbelly where we hide our discrimination with a smile. And we hide our unkindness by claiming that we are the kindest place in the country, when often that is not true. And there is a dull lake of discrimination in every room that you go in, if you are Black, Indigenous, homosexual, transgender, any of those things. So, it's going to test those waters, and I'm interested to see how allies show up to help keep folks safe in these difficult times.
Thank you, Mica. Heidi, can you tell us a little about your experience and how you're seeing these times?
Well, how I see these times are, Indigenous people have been left out of the political climate and political atmosphere here in Nova Scotia and in Canada, and particularly Indigenous women since since the Indian Act was put in place, and more specifically since since 1951. With respect to the legislation and its sexist laws with respect to Indigenous women. So having a place in politics, even in our own communities, is very difficult. And I've seen our women over the last couple of years, more particularly the one Chief Annie Daisley in Waikagma, that felt forced to resign as being chief because of misogyny, because of violence against her, and some of the decisions she made and things like that. So she resigned as chief a few months back, right? And so I feel that not only in the Nova Scotia context, but also in the Canadian political context, Indigenous people, and more particularly women, have been left out. So when you look at more colonial rules, I feel that, with the discrimination against Indigenous women under the Indian Act, then we were left out of our own political structures within our communities, and so that has been a damaging impact on our women and on our system. So the Old Boys Network is really, really dominant within our communities, and it always has been. And people talk about this matriarchal system that we have, but we don't have that anymore, because it's been, taken over and controlled by the federal government, that controls the lives of Indigenous people from the day you were born till the day you die, and so I think from the Nova Scotia context, I think people need to understand, especially Indigenous people, that they need to participate in provincial elections because they think it doesn't affect them because of jurisdictional issues, but it does. And I think that people need more education with respect to the political climate in this in Nova Scotia, and also to start running for office, right? I think we have one MP, that's Jaime Bettis, and you notice a difference. There was a change when a woman, Nadine Bernard, for instance, she ran for provincial politics. The chiefs and the leadership did not go out of their way to really endorse her and do what they did for Jaime. Do you know what I mean? So that's a big difference in itself, and so just things like that. So leaving women out of that whole political system, not only under the Indian Act, but traditionally also has been one of the narcissistic and discriminatory factors that we had to adhere to within our communities, as well as sexualized violence, as well as, anything like, with respect to that, so I think that, like degrading Indigenous women, things like that, so I think that those violence against women, and in particular Indigenous women, needs to be at the forefront of any politics or anything. Like, you don't hear anything in like political campaigns or anything about human trafficking. Never. I've never heard it once, and they say that Nova Scotia has the highest human trafficking rate in Canada per capita. Never heard it once. And those are issues that we need to look at, anything like that. So I think that those are things that we need to look at within Nova Scotia, and then just to try to, that climate does affect us.
Mm.
Thank you.
So many more obstacles. And in the last question, before we leave this evening, let's talk about how can we be allies with Indigenous sisters so that they have at least a better chance of being in the political arena. Thanks, Heidi. I'm so glad you're here to bring that perspective.
Thank you.
Pam, can you share a bit about your experience?
Certainly happy to, and thank you so much for coordinating this. And I'm glad to see that folks have joined us. I just wanted to say, Heidi, I did talk about human trafficking on the campaign trail when I was running for mayor of Halifax, because it is a serious issue. And, I was the only woman in the race for mayor out of 16 people, and I was the only one talking about human trafficking, because it seems that women are talking about women's issues, or what most people perceive to be as women's issues. But I just want to stress that power is political, and so if we are considering about we want to take that power, then we have to enter into that political realm. And as you've mentioned, Heidi, we've got to find a way to get people more and more engaged. But what I found on the campaign trail in 2016 and 2020 and again in 2024 was the realm of sexism was equal between men and women. So women were sexist towards me as much as men were sexist towards me. It is the narrative that the public carries with them. And the only way to combat that truly is education. It's about raising the awareness. It's about helping people understand, why some of their comments could be perceived as being sexist, or why there's another way to consider a woman's ability to be a mayor or a premier, to be even a prime minister, to take those leadership roles. But we have traditionally, and I'm coming at this from spending time on the board at Equal Voice Canada, women have traditionally considered parity, or more than parity, to be the end goal, to say to one another, we've reached it, right? Parity is great now. But that's not the case, because the reality is that while we may have a focus on parity, and that's great that, Halifax now has more women than more men on council, for example, it really is an anomaly, because we're still celebrating it. So what I think we need to focus on is the process of, as what Heidi mentioned, that engagement. How do we actually get more people aware of their place in taking that political power, in owning that political space, and being a leader in community? So I think that a lot of it has, for me personally, I've just spent a lot of time educating people, helping them understand that a woman has just as much right to be that politician as a man. But when I hear stories around like Nadine, I saw that happen to Nadine. And I thought, well, why are they not rallying around her? Well, it's
Exactly.
because the perception is, oh, but she's a woman. She can't be a leader. She can't do that. So we need more examples. And how do we get those examples? We rally around those women. We must support them. We must be the ones that are the bystanders to see this rhetoric and this derogatory comments on social media and actually counter it. Counter it with kindness, counter it in an educational manner, counter it in a very patient way to help someone understand it's inappropriate. There's no space for hate. And it's time for us to change the perception of the fact that women are exceptional leaders. And we've had many examples, but just not enough. So I think that, Sue, to go back to the question, we've seen a lot of change in how more and more women are stepping up. The fact that we had Kamala Harris actually enter into that race, knowing that she was so far behind to begin with, and she had the crutch of Biden and his previous campaign to deal with, but she fought a really good fight. And so rather than always focusing on the outcomes and how many women get elected, we need to focus on the process of getting them elected, building them up throughout that entire process, and know that every election is another opportunity. But prior to that election, so really the most important time, Sue, is between elections. We've got to get women prepared now to get their names and on the ballot and to get their imposter syndrome, as Kacy had mentioned, like to get that out of the way. Let's deal with that. Let's build up the confidence. But also let's build up the team. The team is how women get elected. So I hope that answered your question, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to continue to be engaged in politics.
There's so much in what's been said already. What you said about the sexism that comes from women as well as men, and that women not believing in one another. And not just women, but also gender diverse people who have, or non-conforming people who have a much harder time. At the very least, we need to support one another in this realm and believe in each other. Yeah. Kacy, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly echo what you're saying about how we need to support one another and build better strategies for, lifting up our own. The experience of running in 2020 versus 2024 was very different for me. Being elected in the midst of the pandemic was very, very disorienting. And I realized how far in our area the pendulum had swung. I was sitting on a council of 11 people, 9 of whom were women, which was a complete reversal from the previous council on which there were only 3 women. It was exhilarating, and I feel like we had really collegial discussions. We deliberated. We researched. We worked together.
Sorry.
No, so it's okay.
My cat just trying to jump on the table.
Oh yeah, no, mine
turned off my
clawing
computer
right now. Yeah,
Huh?
my cat's clawing my ankle up right now.
You probably would have turned off the computer. He was trying to jump on it. Anyways,
Right.
Hear me right now. I just need to break in for a second.
sorry about that, you guys.
Go ahead.
Just for security's sake, would everyone put their full name on their profile picture, please? It'll just help us verify who's registered and who's not. So I'll keep you posted if anything changes.
Thanks, Julie. So yeah, I'm just going to continue my thought.
Sorry about that.
Oh no, not at all, not at all. As somebody with ADHD, jumping here and there, that's just how I roll. So yeah, right. I was talking about how far the pendulum had swung, and I felt people actively trying to swing that pendulum back, like pushing on it, trying to get women de-elected, trying to make sure there were more men on council. And I heard from women in the past 4 years saying, wow, that's a lot of women on council. I don't think, I bet you didn't bat an eyelash when it was all men, you know. It's just the way people are hardwired is what it feels like, because we've had millennia of men being in charge and being in charge of our bodies and what we can and can't do. And so now that we have our own voices, it's so important that we use them to uplift each other. In this moment of strong men politics and shock politics and things like that, it's just so important to get back to basics for how we can motivate and just lift each other up. Misogyny is something that toxifies our world and our culture and the colonial structures that it built. We need to actively be working together to break these down. And yeah, activating our allies, that is key, because our detractors, they don't need activating. They're coming out in droves. They know where to find us. And it's becoming increasingly unsafe for women in our field to just do their jobs. So getting our allies out there, showing up, continuing to show up, to use their voices. I mean, it's a full-time job, but it's what must be done. And I just want to end with one thought, which is something that is so motivating to me. In a recent development in my district, I came into contact with this young couple who is working to, protect their land. And after having worked with them and them seeing how hard I worked my job and how much I cared, this young trans man now wants to job shadow me and receive mentorship to do this job. And I'm just so, it just fills me up emotionally that, I am providing that kind of role model for people. And I'm making no bones about it, that it is going to be a uphill struggle for them, but I've got their back. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Kacy. So the things that you've all been talking about are raising another question for me about how we shift the power dynamics in the political arena, and how being in a structure in a feminist, intersectional, inclusive way can help to shift those dynamics. Like, what does that look like? That was not one of the questions I sent to you all, so I appreciate if you're not prepared for that. But
I just wanted
about,
sorry.
yeah, please go ahead, Heidi.
Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, is that okay? Because I just kind of
Yeah,
want to
please.
say something just to start the conversation about feminism. Like in my, in my view, we need to look at the roles of Indigenous women also within their communities. And so what are the roles of the grandmother? What are the roles of, what was our matriarchal society like prior to feminism? I know that, we don't really call it feminist. We call it bring in, what's the role of Indigenous women in our societies? What was that role, as nurturers? What is, where has that, what has happened to that role? And I know I went to like feminist movements, feminist conferences where I didn't feel that I belonged there. But just because of those structures, right? And also that imbalance. And also what, from an Indigenous perspective, from an Indigenous woman and grandmother's perspective, what the differences are there and how it's so significant and what is the role of our women and our grandmothers within our society. Like we need more structures within our communities, even to go back into, like, to have like grandmothers wisdoms councils when they used to go to our grandmothers and ask for the advice, even though we didn't think that they were leading in the political, like, that being grand chiefs or whatever, but we're the ones that they listened to. And then so what were the roles as nurturer, as grandmother, so important, like to ensure that not all of us are from that, white, I don't like using the term, but white feminist, philosophy or that era, like I'm not there,
So that term really doesn't resonate at all, because what you're talking about is reclaiming the power of the women, of the feminine aspect in Indigenous culture.
100% reclaiming our power.
And how do you see that happening, Heidi?
More allyship, more education, more awareness. And like I know I'm delivering, just for instance, I'm doing some allyship training now with the Nova Scotia Youth Project for the LGBTQ plus youth with Madonna Doucette here in Cape Breton. So we're doing so the allyship training that people do need to be, like, sure, there's generic on how to smudge, how to do your protocols, how to do this, but we need different allyship for political structures, for people running in politics. How can we each be our own allies? Like I know that Pam talked about, we need to support each other. So allyship is so important in different areas. So I always look at, so what does the rainbow community want with respect to how can they be our and how can we be their allies? Like we need to work with them as well, right? So I asked Madonna, I had a meeting with her yesterday for 2 hours. I said, what do you want to know? How can I structure my allyship training to meet your needs? Same with political, same with, anything on human trafficking, for instance, is a big one for me, because the Jane Paul Center, when we opened it, we had like nothing. It was just me in one little office. Now they have 15 staff, and that was through a lot. And that wasn't that was like us fighting for that support with the politicians, with the chiefs, with the leadership, because they were wondering, well, why do you want these women there? What can you do for them? There's things like that that's so important. And so just like I said, just reclaiming that power within ourselves and within our community. Sorry for taking over that question, but
No, I'm
answer.
so glad you did, because it's an important distinction that, sometimes these terms are even outdated, or they are by inherently exclusive as opposed to inclusive, if they don't actually embrace a broader sense of what it means. No, thank you for sharing that, Heidi. That's important.
Yeah, and it gives us all an opportunity to kind of correct our own thinking or biases, preconceptions, language. So thank you.
Mhm.
I think
Are there other thoughts about that?
I think
Yeah, certainly. So I think this really speaks to what Heidi was talking about, but I think decolonizing and re-indigenizing a lot of our political structures, a lot of the way that we understand gender identity, gender-based violence is really important. And additionally, I think it's so important for us to build solidarity across our movements. Like, you stole the words right out of my mouth, Heidi, so I'm glad you said it before I could.
you stole mine to decolonize. I want to talk about that later on when we end.
Yeah, so it really is for me building those solidarity across movements. It tends to be the idea that folks that are right leaning are more engaged. Folks that have those kind of more conservative views, who tend to view politics as a tool that gets them to the places and the things and the end goals that they want, are more engaged in those systems. So it's finding those folks that are looking to decolonize, that are looking to, forward rainbow inclusion, to
Mhm.
get them into those rooms, to get them into those discussions, to build
100%.
solidarity, to get them out to voting stations, and to let them know the more you use your voice, the more that it has power. Because a lot of folks now feel as though the political system is futile and that they don't want to engage in it and abstain from voting. You know, voting is our greatest power, and to make folks feel like the system works, we have to make them get engaged at the most core level, you know, so.
Yeah, the rates of voting were quite low in these recent elections. So that is something to be concerned about. Senator Wanda, you're back, and maybe we'll give you an opportunity to speak, because we certainly have talked a lot about allyship. But if you'd like to weigh in on any of it, please do.
I'm sorry, which question are you on now?
I went off script.
Oh.
But it was a very interesting opportunity, because I was talking about how can we change the power structures through kind of a feminist intersectional inclusive lens. And Heidi was talking about, you know, that term, even feminist, is really irrelevant to Indigenous women who are reclaiming the power of the feminine, of the grandmothers, of the role of women in society, and that it requires allyship, and that she's doing allyship training with people. And how can we have solidarity between movements and between identities, so that we can counteract some of these structures that are so male centric and colonial centric and white centric. Also totally off script, sorry.
Okay. It's hard to sort of jump back in. When I left, I heard Mica, and then Professor Heidi was speaking as I stepped away. So in response to that first question, so I don't know what I'm about to say may have already been shared. So be it, if that's the case. But I'll tell you, I wanted to put on the record with regards to the recent elections, the recent US election. You know, I want to start with that. When I think about the fact that an elderly white male, sexist, misogynist felon was chosen overwhelmingly over a racialized woman candidate, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes to the world, right? When you think about the US power in the world and the fact that that's the way that Americans voted. And in record numbers, people came out. Some people who had never voted before came and voted. So I'd love to engage in conversations with people about that, with Americans. I want to talk to Americans. I especially want to talk to African Americans, some of whom voted for, you know, who made that decision. And so then I sort of think about that at the same time that I think about our recent election, provincial. So I didn't get the numbers of the voter turnout for our municipal elections, but I did pay attention to the voter turnout for our provincial election, and it was shocking that so few people voted. And the few that voted, they gave this government a supermajority. So, you know, with any government, you have the ministers and you have the backbenchers. They're going to have side benchers. And one of the things I keep saying to myself, well, I wonder who's going to be relegated to the side bench. You know, how many of the side benchers will be women? There aren't that many racialized people even running. So the representation, the lack of representation. So those are the things that I've been sort of thinking about. But just to pick up where you were as I re-entered the space, thinking about how do we move forward, I believe that our collective power is in us working together. And if we're not able to work together, if we choose not to work together, if we choose not to be authentic allies, then that will be our demise. Because there are so many people that feel so they're disengaged, you know, disenfranchised. A lot of people choose not to vote because they think the votes don't matter. And the mantra that I have is, look, my ancestors had to fight for the right to vote. Women had to fight for the right to vote. And even when women got the right to vote, it was for white women. It wasn't for all of us. And so the fact that we've had to fight for the right to vote is what drives me to vote, even if I'm not happy with the choices. I believe that by working together, working across our oppressions, and looking at, what are the things, what do we have in common? How can we work together? How can we work together on an agenda that will help us all move forward, that would help make our society better? That's what drives me. That's what keeps me going. Quite frankly, that's the reason why when Sue calls me, I say yes, because I know that Sue is an ally. And so I want to support the work that you're doing, because I know you support the work that I'm doing. We work together. We're doing this journey together because we believe we believe that change is possible. And if I stop believing that change is possible, then I will no longer be able to get up in the morning. I will no longer have a reason to get up in the morning. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks. Pam, what's percolating for you about all that?
Great discussion. I just want to point out that while we tear down and rebuild structures, we need to do them intentionally together. And we can only do that if we have good, strong relationships. And we can only have relationships if we have trust. And so, working hard to build that trust takes time. But at the same time, we are rebuilding and transforming an institution that has existed for a very long time. So I think we have to question whether or not we actually want to rebuild that institution. Because I'm not convinced that taking the colonial model and just dusting it off and, tweaking this here and tweaking that is actually going to net us the results of inclusivity and peace that we're looking for. So I almost, and I'll just, people have said this to me before, that my nickname is Burn It All Down Pam, because I do believe that if we burn it all down, we can rebuild it together. But we can only rebuild it together if we have the trust, we have the relationships, and we have the intention of this collaborative goal. And I think a lot of times we have these different groups that are not able to come together to agree. And I saw that with Equal Voice. The whole premise is that we raise each other up. And that's a beautiful thing. But as we're raising each other up, we also have to recognize there are different perspectives around the room with very different lived experience. And so what we see is going to be very different. And as Heidi pointed out, with the concept of feminism. So I guess, Sue, what I'm trying to say is I almost feel like we need to, and it's not a utopian belief, but it truly is a transformative belief as far as what is that end structure going to look like to ensure that democracy is no longer threatened by the bullies, because it truly is the bullies that are keeping people out of the current system that exists. It is the hate. It is the belief that somebody else has more agency and more power than another person. And so I guess that my question continues to be, how do we actually transform a system that's completely broken, inherently broken to begin with?
Yeah. That's the $64,000 question. How do we, if we could rebuild it in a way that was more equitable, more consensus-based, less violent, and where harassment and vitriol toward one's colleagues or toward anyone who chooses to serve in a public way is no longer acceptable. How do we do that? Kacy, you haven't weighed in on this. Did you want to?
Yeah, certainly. Your point about what makes you still want to get up in the morning, Senator Thomas, or Senator Bernard, I'm so sorry. That's something that that weighs on me. It's you know, the speed with which these systems of oppression are ramping up, you know, to bring us back to the good old days, the MAGA principle there, the resources that are being brought to bear to, you know, push us back down. It's deeply depressing. And we aren't keeping up, but that's all the more reason to keep trying and try harder, keep getting up in the morning, right? Because otherwise, what's it all for? So your original question was, how do we disrupt these, you know, these dynamics, these masculine arenas? And I think just by existing, we're doing that. So we need to keep doing what we're doing. We need to find more of us. We need to make sure that our voices are not being silenced, and we are making sure that nobody else's voices are getting silenced. On the campaign trail, I was out with a supporter because I was not going door to door by myself any more than I could avoid. I had a few near misses, but fortunately they were all when I had somebody with me, and they were able to get me out of there. For the most part, it was great interactions. I had a really positive campaign. But one day when I was with a supporter, we had just had our little pep talk. Okay, so like, I love to talk. So once I've said my piece, you say, okay, I've got to keep Kacy moving. And this lady let us in her door. It was her and her mother. And I said my piece, and I gave my pitch, and said why I wanted to do the job for 4 more years. And she let me talk for more than 5 minutes before she said, well, I don't vote. And full stop. And I didn't even know how to react. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard it either. But just like, I don't vote. What did women fight and die for? What did women of color fight so hard for that you just choose to not vote? I mean, like, I understand that people are disengaged and they're checked out and disenfranchised, as you said. It's just, there's so many reasons why we need to be so checked in this moment. And my supporter, fortunately, saw what I saw. That I was just about to flip my lid and tell her exactly why she needed to vote. Doesn't matter who you vote for, but you better vote. And she turned me around and said, stay on message, and we're gonna go. And I said, okay, fine, this is not the hill to die on. But the larger hill on which to die is that, yeah, we need that civic engagement, broad scale. One tiny little anecdote, there's a cafe in my district. I'm just deeply in love with the owner, and she is planning on running a series of local workshops in the new year on civic engagement and you know, the various levels of government and all the things that we don't get taught in school anymore. And I just, you know, I love seeing that type of that type of action. So I mean, maybe that balances out the people who just don't vote because they don't care to make a choice, but we definitely need more of that in the world.
Yeah. And I think, Pam, when you talk about trust and how we build relationships and build trust, there's also such a loss of trust in our public institutions. And partly it's because they run in those patriarchal ways that leave out a lot of people and, and are not just, and they're not inclusive. And so, you know, the trust among individuals and in coalitions mirrors the trust in the broader society too. So it's a big question for us. I wonder if there are some questions in the chat, Aaliyah, that we may want to ask at
Yeah,
this
we
point.
do have one question. Hang on. So, I'll just see if I can read this properly. So, how to contend with the pattern when women do come to power is at the head of far-right movements to make them more palatable. So I'm not sure if I read that correctly. It's because I think there were some errors in the question, maybe. So just let me know if that sounded right.
I'm not sure if I understood the question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to like so if I read it directly from the question, it how to I'm assuming how to contend with the pattern when women who come to power is at the head of far right movements to make them more palatable.
So I can answer that question because I'm very aware of this issue. So the issue is that to make political parties or political movements more palatable that are far right, they connect with women and place them you know, in winnable ridings, so to say, to look like they're actually, you know, appealing to women, or they look like they're attempting to be progressive. When in actual fact, what we see time and time again, and I've had many conversations with women and who are attempting to get elected. And I'll just call it out. The PPC is a great example. And my values do not align with that political party. But yet, you know, the question is, how do we contend with the pattern? Here's the great thing about democracy. Everyone has the right to join any political movement in this country. That's a fact. And at the same time, everyone has the right to learn about other opportunities, to associate with any organization. Thankfully, we do have a Charter of Rights and freedoms. But that being said, when a political movement or a political party, as we've seen many time and time again, attempt to remove the rights of a queer folk, trans folk, try to remove the rights of women, you know, strip away reproductive rights and so on and so forth, we as women are contending with the fact that we live in a democracy and these women have the right to make these decisions and be a part of this movement. But the difficulty is when those women appear to be being used as pawns to further a political agenda by using a gender. And that's really frustrating. And so I don't, Ona Young, the question is from Ona. I don't have any clear answer to this, but this has been something that has been talked about at the Equal Voice table for many years. And I think it's something that, you know, really comes down to the fact that we need to recognize we live in a democracy and women have the right to choose whatever political party they want to be in. But remember, less than 4% of Canadians are part of a political party. So if we truly want to change our politics, then we need to get involved in a political party. Or my choice is to create a brand new political party that is representative of the needs and the wishes of, well, people around this table, but people who are looking for a more inclusive and equitable political agenda to grab hold of.
Will you let us know when that is available to us?
Working on it. Yeah.
And how we can help?
Will do.
Please go ahead, Wanda.
I don't know where to find the hands raised thing, so
That's
I'll just
okay.
put my hand up. I believe that part of the problem is that we think about politics by elections. And I think we really need to bring politics and political engagement more into our everyday lives. And so what does that mean? It means holding our elected officials to account. It means raising the questions, sending the emails, having the conversations. And I think it also means us taking responsibility for doing the kind of education. Kacy, you were saying you have someone in your writing who's having these sort of community engagements, educating around a political engagement. I'm doing something very similar in my community as well, with some other people who feel strongly about this. So I think we have more power to change the political agenda than we recognize. And I believe that we need to have voice in every political party. I've seen it happen far too easily for people to just get sort of sucked into a system, a political party system. But pardon me, we need to have voices everywhere. We need to have, we need to have that sort of social justice lens everywhere in every party. So how do we do that? And how do we, when people step up and sort of go into those spaces, how do we support them and mentor them and, lift them up so that they can bring those voices to those spaces where you otherwise feel very unwelcomed? That may be, too far out there, but that's where my thinking is these days. We have to
When
disrupt it.
When Kacy first came to a bunch of us to talk about running again, it was clear around the table, and there were 3 or 4 different organizations represented locally, and really wondering, well, what if we could be a support network for you? And then Allison decided to run as well. And so being a network of support for these 2 councillors locally, because and it's possible that locally is the place where people can have the biggest impact in their municipal councils. I mean, we know each other, we are neighbors. And so I'm wondering, Pam, for you, or Wanda for you, or Mica, and also Heidi, what would have been helpful for you in your political aspirations or in the work that you're doing in order to encourage more women to run for elected office, women and non-conforming people? More like Heidi, what are the things that Indigenous women need? What would be helpful to them when they're considering that? So maybe you can all talk about that.
Sorry, I was on mute. I had a little distraction here. My son-in-law came in and had to put my tires in my car to get them put on yesterday. My car was a mess.
Nice.
So you had to move everything out like about into the office, right? So it's just so funny. I had to take it was just so crazy. I had to like a few minutes. Anyway, so I think that
Snow tires are a good thing.
so I think that our women need to support also and also just to understand our differences, right? It's so important. Like knowing what's important to Indigenous women, not only in our communities, but in the municipality, in the province, in Canada, for instance, And for instance, I know that, there's a lot of like I consider looking at I always consider the TRC recommendations and the MMIWG calls for justice, where where they're calling on governments to even implement at least one of these, and then so they're and all governments, not just municipalities or federal or provincial, but also First Nations governments, to at least start implementing these the calls for justice are so important, to our women. So I think understanding the issues of Indigenous women within all society, like I said, is so important. What are the differences? What are the cultural differences in even like in political views? Our women think with our hearts, like rather than hair, and so it's more compassion. It's bringing up and all of our women in general, not just Indigenous women. Like we have families. We're the nurturers of our entire families. Even non-Indigenous women are, whether you realize it or not. You're the caregivers. You carry your children. You look after your children. You're the main people that picks up the kids at swimming. I did it, like, and I'm still doing it for my grandkids, and plus you still have to, and then you're still running for office and you're in office, so you're looking after so if you know how to look after your family and care for your family, and that's one of your main roles, then you can certainly run for politics and be involved at that political level, because that's so important. So it's not only Indigenous women that are nurturers, you're nurturers as well, because we were, women are like the force of their families, as you all know, and it comes with multiple layers of, just, being a woman and being in politics and having a job. And, as you all know, there's been multiple barriers for myself. Like I didn't come from a political family in my community. So it was always struggle work, you know what I mean? Like, I was in an era where I was brought up by a single father. My mother died from tuberculosis when I was 3 years old. So it was all that though, and then staying in school was a big, success for me, and just things like that. So if you're not, and so I didn't come from a political family at all. So so I became an advocate, and a very strong advocate, for not only for Indigenous women, right? And not only finding their voices within our communities, but within the healthcare system, within the bank council system, within any systems that we need to break down those barriers 100%. Okay, I'll stop now because I can go on and on.
It's a big topic.
We have some more questions in the chat. Just letting you know if we wanted to talk
Okay.
about those.
Sure.
So the first one is for Senator Thomas Bernard from Tracy. It says, "Thank you for your important work in the Senate. I'm wondering if you see any difference in the culture of the Senate because it has less partisanship compared to the House of Commons. Does this free senators up to speak about race and gender issues more? What's your hope for the Senate in leading the way to advance equity and inclusion in Canadian decision-making, particularly if a Conservative government is elected?"
So a few things. I would say the majority of the senators who are in office now have been appointed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So that means they are independent. The majority are independent. But the way our constitutional system works, we have the smallest group in the Senate is the Progressive Conservatives in the Senate, and they're the official opposition. And so in a sense, we're less partisan, and we work hard at not, buying into partisanship. The reality is we're still very partisan because it's not something that we actually control. But there are a number of senators, who feel very strongly about social justice. And so we speak about issues of race and racism and homophobia and transphobia and misogyny. Like those issues are often coming up so I believe that things aren't as bad here as they are in the House of Commons. Things are pretty difficult in the House of Commons these days. With the new election, if the Conservative government is elected, I they've already made it pretty clear they're going back to the way senators used to be appointed. And that's appointment by party affiliation. So we know that. But once you're here until you turn 75. You know, we have mandatory retirement at the age of 75. So we're here in the majority. So it'll take some time before you see a swing back. But it'll be a different place with a conservative government in power as compared to the current government in power. Just the climate and the dynamics will be very different.
Yeah. Mica, do you want to say a little about what, because you said in the introduction that you stepped away from being a municipal candidate because of the risk of violence. Can you say what might have been helpful for you in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the huge things for me was that there wasn't safety in numbers, that a lot of young people aren't actively politically engaged out there, involved in party politics, aren't involved in non-party politics at the municipal level, for example, in their district elections, in their local band elections, stuff like that. A lot of the youth are not utilizing and getting out there and getting involved. So one of the biggest things for me is that I didn't feel safety in numbers to go out and campaign. Specifically as a trans woman, I didn't want to knock on people's doors and be by myself or with one, maybe if I'm lucky, two other people, and face people's own preconceived notions, prejudices against to us LGBTQ plus folks as a whole, but specifically around trans, two-spirit, gender nonconforming folks. I didn't want to have to come face to face with that. And I think one of the big things is that we have to be able to get out there. I worked behind the scenes in politics as well for a number of years, and as many brilliant people that supported you and wanted to see you do well and foster your success, there was another number of folks that would happily see you trip, fall, and fail. And, you know, I think until we foster a more inclusive environment all around and a more engaged environment all around, folks like me won't feel comfortable to get out there and to put their face on a sign. Specifically as well, Pam talked about how there were 15 men and 1 woman on the ballot. And Pam, I commend you for your bravery, because the level of misogyny that must have, you know, came your way during that period is not to be scoffed at. It's a real issue. And, you know, we talked about it at the beginning, how the kind of our neighbors down south are kind of shifting our political climate as well to that more extremist kind of rhetoric, and that rhetoric being more comfortable. So I think one of the things is I would really encourage folks to get engaged, join your local party associations, your electoral district associations, get out there, get engaged with your local parties, talk to folks, and potentially put your name on a sign, put your face on a sign. One of the best ways to combat prejudice is to get out there and be visible. And I hope one day it is safe for folks to get out there and to feel comfortable knocking on the doors. I know for myself, it wasn't 2024. That was not the year.
Yeah. Thank you for considering it.
Thank you.
Pam, do you want to say anything more about that?
Thank you. Yes. Well done, Mica. You know, I commend you. And, you know, when you're speaking about, you know, the hesitancy to enter into that realm, knowing what you're going to be faced with, and just thinking of your own mental health, because that's what's something I was constantly thinking about in, you know, 2016, 2020, 2024 is my own mental health and the health of my family, because my children are also watching this and seeing this. And, you know, so I commend you for considering getting on the ballot, and I hope that you continue to engage. But therein lies the problem, is how do we ensure that the candidates who have the drive and the excitement and the passion to get out there are actually wrapped with support. And that those people who are wrapping those candidates with support have the tools, they have the knowledge, they know how to run a campaign, they understand fundraising, they've got marketing taken care of, and the candidate can just go and be a candidate. Instead, women and diverse candidates, they're out there, they're the campaign manager, they're doing the fundraising, they're trying to figure out everything to actually get this campaign up and running. And so the burden to actually make this happen is heavy. It's no small feat, as Kacy and Allison can attest to. Running a campaign takes a toll. And then you get into government, and then you need to be supported, by your institution, by your government to actually do your job. The whole reason that you campaign is to make sure that you can represent the voices of the people, not only those who sent you, because you're also representing those who did not vote for you. And so it's about trying to find a way to how do we then create those relationships, build that trust. And I just wanted to point out the question from Hueda. Hueda, great to see you. I'm glad you're here on democracy, because the democracy consistently gets broken down and smashed apart when we push people away from getting engaged. And so I just feel like this strategy needs to start now. And Sue, yeah, I think it was you that mentioned, that not a lot of people voted in the provincial election. We had, I think, 36 or 37% voted in the municipal election. People don't see why they should engage. So we've got 4 years now to get to work. So Mica can be on the ballot in 2028.
Woohoo! So we are a small province, and there are benefits to being in a province where the networks are tight, people know each other. In some ways, we could get things done here that are harder in a larger province. When you think about what the strengths are that we have in Nova Scotia to draw on, how can that help in this endeavor? Both to elect a wider range of people into political office, but also then to change how politics works and what's acceptable and what's not, and bringing more heart, as you say, Heidi, and bringing more consensus building and more discussion and less patronizing, sarcasm and criticism of one another. What are the strengths that we can draw on in Nova Scotia to accomplish that?
Maybe I could jump in to start that conversation, Sue. I think you've said it yourself. One of the strengths is our size. Because we're small, we should know who our elected officials are in our municipalities, and also our provincial and our federal. And so the work that I was saying earlier, at the risk of sounding repetitive, I think I think it's helpful for me to repeat it here. So I think you said we have 4 years. We have 4 years before the next election, but what do we do in this 4 years? So I'm thinking about the work around violence against women. So one of the other strengths we have is actually the monitoring committee that's monitoring the work from the mass casualty. I mean, that was a tragedy. It was an absolute tragedy, but the report from the Mass Casualty Commission, I think, gives us a really good blueprint in terms of how to move forward. And so I think it's doing things like holding all levels of government to account in terms of continuing that work, and asking questions at the right time. that need to be asked, asking the questions that some of our folks, quite frankly, are afraid to ask because of the harm they know will come to them. So those of us who are in positions where, we can bring voice to some of these things, I think it's important for us to do that. But let's do the work in these 4 years to hold our elected representatives accountable for the positions that they've taken on to represent us. They won't know our voices, our issues, unless we put them out there. I'm always surprised when I ask people, well, who's your local councillor? Most people don't even know the difference between the different levels of a government. We have a lot of work to do to educate, young people and the general public. We really do. Kacy, your story about meeting this person who said, well, I don't vote. When people say that to me, I want to scream. I want to scream. You have to vote. But I tend not to scream because I know if I scream, people will want to. Anyway, that's another story.
I don't react well. Yeah.
Yes. But so I really try to engage people in conversations about, so I don't focus on why people are choosing not to vote, but I choose to tell people why I vote, why I've always voted ever since I was old enough to vote. Every time I vote, when I vote, I think about my ancestors who couldn't vote. And so reminding people of that, and in a sense, that's sort of calling people into a process around the importance of having the right to vote and then exercising that right, as opposed to calling people out and getting angry with people for not voting. I try to sort of bring people along to talk about the importance of voting and why that, why I would encourage them to see it as more of a priority in the future.
Yeah. Calling people in, not calling them out. Exactly. Could I chime in on that?
Please.
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of advantages here in Nova Scotia. I think, the pandemic has really taught us a lot of lessons. It's taught us how small our world can become, and among many other things. But it really is a small world here in Nova Scotia. We know each other. We know our neighbors in a way that a lot of other places, I don't think you get that, right? Like you don't get to know who's in your community, who's doing what, who's responsible for who. And I think like if we, collectively can get back to some of the more basics where we do know our neighbors, where we do make those efforts to build that community fabric and that tapestry, it'll pay dividends. Holding power to account is a lot easier if you know that your local politician lives 2 doors over. And I think that Nova Scotians have that kind of kitchen party mentality, like at the drop of a pin. You put a few Nova Scotians into a kitchen together and get some music going. It's pretty easy to make some friends. So going to meet people where they are and have real conversations about the issues that matter to you as a candidate, as a politician, as a human inhabiting the same space as another human, it's got real power. And I think that that's something that Nova Scotians are really good at. But that is just my perspective, and my perspective is one of many. So I'd honestly love to hear from the other panelists on this too.
Chime right in. Pam, Mica, Heidi.
Oh, just very quickly, I agree with everything that's been said. I do think that if we're considering the community as it exists today, then we're limiting ourselves. Our communities are changing very quickly. The dynamics of the communities, culture of the communities, they're changing. And I think that's a lot where this resistance is coming from, is that people are seeing their communities change. And it's not about what's better or what's worse or what have you. It's just about evolution of how our world grows. And I think that people aren't given the tools. They don't know where to access the tools to accept the change or to learn more about the change. Whether it's, I hear people oftentimes complaining about apartment buildings. Why are they building so many apartment buildings? Because families, people want a place to live. Well, no, people don't live in apartment buildings. And you hear this and you think, yeah, well, I grew up in an apartment building. It was great. It was a house. It was a roof. It was awesome. But the resistance to accept somebody else's perspective and this inability to accept a differing viewpoint is something that I think Nova Scotia in particular is struggling with. Now, we see it. We see the conversations happening differently in rural communities than we do in urban areas. And I think part of that is the disconnection and the distance of not being able to come together. The one thing Nova Scotia has been really good at is responding to crisis. Nova Scotians show up to help out no matter what. But sometimes we forget about each other when we're not in a crisis, or we begin to accept the state of the crisis, such as homelessness. So I feel as though there's an opportunity that we need to grab hold of, which is to actually provide more time for people to have their voices heard. And, even when you're going to the door, and I've done it many times, going to a door and it's not a friendly door. And that door is yelling at me, and that door is telling me what a horrible job I've done and I'm the worst politician ever. And at the same time, they're mad at me for something that I have no control over. That's not my order of government. I'm over here and they're talking about a federal issue. And so I think, this difficulty in having these conversations, when in actual fact, people just need to vent. This is a difficult time for all of us right now. And yet we don't. I got to say, I'm going to give a plug for the Todd Vino show here in Nova Scotia, because people get on that show and they vent. And after they've had an opportunity to vent, they can kind of sit back and go, okay, but now it's a time to get to work. As Senator Bernard kind of highlighted, like all these things, we've got to get to work. We've got to engage within those 4 years, but we also have to give people an opportunity to have a space where they can be heard in a non-violent, non-aggressive manner. And I don't know about you, but I feel like the town halls are one of the best ways for people to come together, share a meal, have some coffee, get up to the mic, have their voice heard, understand what the issues are. And I don't think our politicians are doing that as much as we should have. And you saw it during the election. Where were the debates? There were no debates. Absolutely no debates. So you wonder why people feel like they're not heard? It's because they're not welcome to be heard. And so I do feel that you're right. We need to hold politicians accountable. We've got to get them out to the town halls. We also need to help people understand what those politicians do, because time and time again, they do not know what a councillor does or what an MLA or MP does. So we need to help people understand those roles. I'm rambling now, but I am really passionate about making politicians stand up and hold those town halls, get out into the community, not just to hobnob, kiss babies, and have a pancake breakfast, but to actually stand up to say, here's the decision that I made, here's why I made this decision, and actually hear from the people that they represent.
Yeah, the whole notion of community engagement has kind of fallen by the wayside. And I was part of helping to develop a community engagement strategy around the Mass Casualty Commission report. And there is great work that came out of that. It's not ready yet in government, and the election kind of put a pause on it. But how do we bring people together in a way that is not hierarchical, but that in a way that gives community voice, and not to argue about things, but to really voice and strategize together about how do we do this differently? That could go a long way. Heidi, Mica, any thoughts?
I just think with community engagement too, you need to know your community. Like you need to know who to engage in the community. Like if you're looking to engage elders or anyone in the community, know your community, know who the people are, within the community. Like I'm doing some work with different organizations in Nova Scotia, like the Workmen's Compensation Board. Like doing some work on, how to engage our communities. I'm doing some work with Elizabeth Fry Society, both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and so I'm just doing so they're looking at doing some decolonizing their policies and how they can be more receptive within the First Nations communities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, right? So I'll be doing a massive road trip soon, I guess, well in the spring. Anyway, so I'm developing the engagement strategy as well, right? But just to make sure that you know the community, I think that's so important. And then know who, like, if you're gonna reach out to, know who your local elders are. Like, it depends on what you're engaged in. Like, know your players in your community before you reach out to your community. But I think one of the advantages that also we have in Nova Scotia, from an Indigenous perspective, is that there's like we're Mi'kmaq here. And so there's no other tribes here, which is very fortunate for us as Mi'kmaq people. And also, I know that the last few years there's been numerous strides with respect to Mi'kmaq being the official language, and with self-government in education and just things like that. So I think we're at an advantage in Nova Scotia with respect to onward serve schools without jurisdiction over education, and so I think in that area and I know that the previous government anyway, we've had a lot of support from government with respect to, the tripartite process, just things like that. So I think in Nova Scotia, we're pretty fortunate with us being just the Mi'kmaq here and having a good relationship with the province as well. And that is a fact. I know that already. And having a good relationship with the Cape Breton Regional Municipality here in Cape Breton also, and with, I'm not sure about Halifax. I know what having the Indigenous liaisons, and I've been doing like I've done some work for the city as well in public safety and also the campaign school. So I think we're very fortunate that way in Nova Scotia, but because we're small enough to be able to do that, and we can identify all the players ourselves, right? Like Pam would know to contact Cheryl, Cheryl would know to contact me. So we kind of know, who the movers and shakers are with respect to gender-based violence, with respect to anything human trafficking. Like I always get called upon to do anything on human trafficking or gender-based violence and things, which is very appropriate because I understand and know. So it's so important to get the right people to speak to these events. And I think in Nova Scotia we're fortunate that way. Even with the African Nova Scotia community, like I know who to call upon, and then same with the LGBTQ plus community, I know who to call upon, and they know who to call upon. So it's really important in those aspects that I think even how Nova Scotia, like we were involved in the I was on the sexualized violence Sarah Granke's committee. It was the sexualized violence strategy. But guess what? We had to fight for that. They didn't include the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association at that time. We had to phone them and ask them. And it was, thank God for Sarah, right? Sarah was right on that, and we were involved right away. And we had a big voice in the strategy at that time as well, and that led to a lot of opening up the Jane Paul Center and stuff as well, because we were one of, the really, vocal points in that area. But I think that those are things that it's very fortunate that we can at least pick up the phone in Nova Scotia and say, hey, why weren't we included? Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's the difference here. And that's what I think is important.
And I'm so glad, Heidi, that now I know you to call on. Because you have a lot that you're involved in. It's great. Other thoughts or other questions? Do we have others?
There is another question from the chat. I don't know if we wanted to.
Sure.
Sure. So there was kind of two, but they're pretty much the same. They're asking for women who've run for office. How did you best connect with voters, and how do you counter right-wing talking points?
So I'll start that. Thank you for those questions. Connecting with voters, it depends on where the voters are, and it really is about understanding who your voters are, who your community is, the various different aspects of your community. It's about getting to know all the different nonprofit groups and really understanding the demographics and the needs of the various different communities. So, for me, it was a lot of door knocking, but it was also going to events, meeting with leaders in the nonprofit organizations, and attending their meetings, and just being out there as much as possible to gather as much information as I could about what it is that the community needed and build that relationship. And as far as countering right wing, I'm just looking at the name who submitted that, and I think we have a former member of parliament with us, Peggy
We
Nash.
do indeed.
Yes. Hey, Peggy. So, here's the thing. My experience is that the talking points, whether it's right wing, left wing, whatever party, those talking points are being jammed down party members' throats to speak them as many times as possible. And to really get that out on social media, the call-in shows, so on and so forth. The only way to counter that is to be very true to your campaign and to know, stick with your campaign talking points and to be very close with your community. Because when you're close with your community, you represent them, you represent their interests, and you can speak to what it is that your community actually wants. Because a lot of times those talking points are just built around, the key kind of pieces that are marketing related and not necessarily speak to on the ground people that understand, that you as a candidate are actually in their corner, that you've got their back, that you want to help them, that you want to build up a stronger economy, that you want to get access to healthcare, whatever the issue is. And so, it's, for me, it's not about countering. It's more about focusing on my campaign talking points and finding that connection with that voter. I hope that helps, but thanks and great to see you here.
If I could jump in specifically on the countering of right-wing talking points around some of the misinformation on the kind of more right-leaning side of things, I do want to specifically start by saying focus on your resources like the American Medical Journal, the Canadian Medical Association. Lean in on fact-based conversation when countering misinformation and those kind of talking points. Because a lot of what you run into with misinformation is people that have fed into a habit of fear mongering and disinformation. It's not backed by science, it's not backed by fact, it's not backed by truth. And when you counter somebody coming, for example, as a trans advocate, I often have to dispel rumors around things like gender affirming care for youth and stuff like that. The reality is that the majority of gender affirming care for people under the age of 18 is accessed by cisgender youth, not trans youth. And it has been that way for decades, 4 or 5 decades now in Canada. So, educating people about the actual context of what they're talking about, and some of the talking points that they use are not based in fact, are not based in medical research, or not based in science. And when you present that to someone in a very matter-of-fact way, it knocks the wind right out of their sails, and they can't really argue with you. Especially when it's coming out of a trans mouth. When you're arguing about trans rights out of a trans mouth, it makes the talking point a lot more poignant. When you're talking about Indigenous needs, Indigenous rights out of an Indigenous mouth, it's a lot more poignant. You know what I mean? So.
I wonder if I could ask Peggy and Tracy to put on your cameras so that we can just introduce you. So Tracy and her colleague Cheryl Collier wrote the book that was recently published, Gender-Based Violence in Canadian Politics in the Me Too Era. And Peggy Nash is indeed a former member of Parliament. Is it possible for them to turn their cameras on, or do we have them all disabled? Or maybe they stepped away.
I think they can. I just have to make them co-hosts.
Oh, there's Tracy.
Yeah. I'm looking for
And Tracy, I'm wondering, because this book, the book that you co-edited, is a compilation from many people and from a global perspective, would you like to weigh in any way on some of these things? On kind of what are some of the things that other people have done elsewhere that can inform what we could do here in Nova Scotia?
Thanks, Sue. Just generally, I say I'm really enjoying the panel, and I live in Toronto, so the experiences that we have in Toronto are actually different from Nova Scotia. So it's been really informative for me to hear the Nova Scotia context specifically. And there's someone actually that I wouldn't mind giving a shout out to. I don't know if she's still here, but Gabrielle Bardal, who is based in Nova Scotia as well. And she has written a chapter in this book that I've co-edited with Cheryl Collier. And Gabrielle's chapter is co-written with Chris Tenoff, and it offers a global comparative perspective of online violence and looks specifically at sort of the international context and where Canada sits relative to other countries. So I just wanted to kind of give her a shout out. And for those of you who haven't picked up the book, that chapter, all the chapters are amazing, but that chapter is really, really great. And one thing I think it's sort of like, I guess, a bit of a takeaway for me is in the book, we didn't really talk too much about the pandemic, but I think Kacy brought that up, and a few of you have maybe touched on that a little bit, and how it is and whether it is that the broader political dynamics of the pandemic, heightened polarization in society, greater elements of toxicity have really changed the landscape. And so I was just kind of reflecting on that as I was listening to everyone on the panel speak, is, I wonder sometimes if, I think I kind of do this for myself in my own work, is think, gee, I sort of wish maybe it had, we could go backwards in time, but the reality is we can't. We're here right now. And so I was just kind of thinking about, maybe this is more for panel 3, what everyone's strategies is to deal with this new reality, because we are in this new reality of heightened polarization and growing toxicity. So yeah, those are just kind of my thoughts. And I really want to just thank everyone for coming and being so brave and sharing all of your experiences. I've really learned a lot.
Thanks, Tracy. And I'll just mention that the book, the publisher is offering a 25% discount on the book up until December 18th. And Leah, I wonder, or Katie, if you have that information, could you put it in the chat? Or you could just Google it from University of Toronto Press. And the book that Peggy Nash has written called Women Winning Office, that publisher, Between the Lines Publishing, is also offering a 25% discount with a promo code from this event, from this series, until December 10th. Peggy, did you want to say anything?
Sure, and I apologize. I went to hit my camera and I exited the Zoom, so I'm all thumbs. It's been such an interesting discussion this evening, and I think I really appreciated the diverse viewpoints and perspectives that women brought to the discussion. And I think of Nova Scotia as such an important place to have this discussion after the mass casualty event report. And thank you for fighting so hard as a community to get an investigation and to get that report. And I think it really laid bare for everybody to see how gender-based violence can affect everyone, and really what an epidemic it is and how it plays out differently in different communities. And I appreciated the perspectives this evening. I spend a lot of my time, and Tracy Rainey and I work together trying to encourage women and other diverse students to engage in politics, to run for office. And it is a double-edged sword. I agree that the climate has become more toxic and more polarized and more difficult. But I take so much hope that there are young people who are engaged. They want to build a better world. And, you know, some of them see elected office as a way to do that. And so we try to encourage that. So thank you to all of you for being leaders in your community, because I think what we have found is that young people need role models, and you are all such great role models. So it's been a pleasure to listen to you this evening. And Sue, you have been a terrific moderator, so thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. We have just 10 minutes left. So if any of the panelists would like to add anything that is kind of a final word on this, please do. And then we'll turn it over to Allison to just do kind of a conclusion and a closing. And we'll tell you that the next panel is on December 10th. And we have Lisa Lachance, who's an MLA in Nova Scotia, Joanne Hussey with the Public Service Alliance, Dr. Rebecca Major, who is one of the authors in Tracy's book, Dr. Lynn Jones in Nova Scotia, and Elizabeth Smith McCrossan, who's an independent MLA here. And you all, of course, are welcome to join us. Any final thoughts from our panelists?
I have one comment, and as we were talking about the recent Nova Scotia election results, and maybe this came up when I had to step away, but the fact that for the first time in Nova Scotian history, we have a woman leading the official opposition, like that's cause for celebration. Yeah. And so we know that she will have a difficult time. And so the question is, so what can we do to support her? Mm-hmm. How can we help her in that role, in the work that she's doing? So I didn't want to leave. That was one of the notes I'd made to self, based on the questions you originally sent us out, Sue. But I wanted to just mention that this evening because I think that's exciting.
And having been a first in many ways, Wanda, for you, you understand the significance of being the first in some ways.
Yes, and I know how important it is to have people that you can call on for support.
Yeah, thank you. Others?
And I would just say, Claudia Tender, Claudia Tender, Claudia Tender. Let's just keep saying her name, Claudia Tender. And it's sad, yes, that it's 2024, and she's finally the very first woman to lead the opposition in the House of Assembly in Nova Scotia. But here we are, and I think you're right. We need to think about how we can support her to continue to do that good job, which is really important, considering they do not have much of a size because we go super majority. So finding time, finding ink actually is going to be a really big problem for that official opposition because they're all going to be, each member will be of the opposition will be holding multiple portfolios. So it's, very important for the community to show up at law amendments, to show up at committee meetings, to follow and ensure that we're sharing information about what is happening. That's our role in this democracy, is to make sure that we share the information. But on the topic of violence and harassment in politics, one of the things that I wasn't ready for was the night I got elected, and then the next morning I was a different person, apparently, to many people, because now I was a politician. Same person, same me, same Pam, but the next day being elected, then it almost felt like I had a kick me sign on my back, spit on me, yell at me, and it was okay because I was a politician. And so that dehumanization of that role, of that job, is the other thing that we're struggling with. It's, yes, women are faced with like horrific, sexualized, violent emails and messages and all this stuff because we're politicians. But the ability to counter that dehumanization the burden shouldn't only be on the politicians. The community and the bystanders need to stand up and say, that's not acceptable. Don't talk that way. Let's, calm down and let's have a civil, mature, professional conversation and treat each other with respect. And I don't know where we went wrong. But I'm just every day I was a politician, I was completely shocked in the way that I was being treated, or that my colleagues were being treated. And so I think the role that we have is to share the human side of the politicians and ensure that we're sharing those stories of the politicians who are doing that really good social ground building, community building work.
Thanks, Pam. Grandmother Heidi, any final words for us?
I just want to say, what a great way to end the conversation, Senator Bernard. I really thank you for that statement. And, just think about that, and I haven't thought about it. But I think that's really a great way to end the conversation tonight. And yours, I know, with the harassment issue also, I know you woke up a different person, and I think that that just like Senator Bernard said, we just all have to support each other 100%. And I think that's a good question. How can we support her? And I just love the way that's ending. Thank you so much for that, Senator Bernard.
Thanks, Heidi. Kacy, Mica? Last thought?
You go ahead, Mica.
I was honestly just gonna say queer liberation, decolonization, and re-indigenization. Build solidarity across the lines of your movements, because we're not going to be white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and colonialism all on our own. There's no sense in siloing our movements. So I really think that one of the big things is that we all engage with each other, people that look like us, people that don't look like us, and get out there and build solidarity. And one thing I wanted to say too is we talked about the fact that we are so tight knit. Be ready to vouch for people, to people of your community, for people that aren't from your community. Say, I've met this person, I know this person, they're good people. And that does go such a long way because we are such a mom and pop's province. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to throw that in there and throw it over to Kacy.
Keep it real tight. Thank you. Thank you, everybody involved. Like I said at the top of this, I was the initial instigator and I had no idea where this would go. At the day after I found out I'd been elected in 2020, I was driving my car and I couldn't stop saying, I did something good. I did something good. I did something good. And that's how I'm feeling right now too, is that, you know, I did something good and now we are doing something good. I'm so happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison, you are our closer.
Oh, there I am. Okay, well, I'm kind of overwhelmed by what everyone's shared tonight, and I could listen to each of you for hours, and I hope that this keeps going in one form or another. And I will touch on the last panel, but I just wanted to say one thing that I noticed that in this panel series, you know, we're talking a lot about the challenges of this moment, and the challenges feel, you know, very, very real and dangerous, and you know, it's a lot of uphill work right now, and it feels like a daily challenge to push back against some of these forces. But I'm also just so struck by the power of the network of people who are stepping forward. And we saw that in the first panel, and we're seeing that again in the second panel. And I just want to say, like, the chat is even more engaged, and you know, providing insights and questions than it was in the first in the first of the panel series. So I've really enjoyed that. But yeah, so you know, there's these challenges, but this network that's stepping forward to support each other, to build solidarity across oppressions, to understand what allyship means for different communities, to rally around women and gender diverse people who are running, to educate our communities, to hold governments accountable between elections, and to support Claudia Gender. You know, it's really inspiring and really heartening. And I just love what we're making in this moment. And yeah, really hoping that that can just keep continuing. And it will continue on December 10th from 6 to 8 our time with the panelists that Sue mentioned earlier, Lisa Lachance, MLA for Halifax Citadel Sable Island, Joanne Hussey, who is the Atlantic Regional Negotiator for PSAC and also a former MLA and MP candidate, as well as Dr. Rebecca Major, Research Chair of Indigenous Governance at Yukon University. And Sue, you had mentioned a third person who's not on my list.
Dr. Lynn Jones.
Oh, Dr. Lynn Jones, great.
And Elizabeth Smith McCrossan.
Oh, okay, and Elizabeth Smith
McCrossan. Just
re-elected. Who's an independent. MLA. I think the first to become elected twice.
Yeah,
in a row as an independent.
Yeah.
So that panel will focus on vision for change, calls to action. So I think we've been doing that in each of our panels, but that will definitely be the focus for the third. So I hope everyone can come back. And I just again, I want to thank all the speakers tonight and the audience. It's been wonderful again, and let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much. And I'll also just mention that we have a number of working groups that are going on, and one of them is about advocacy, about collective advocacy in this sector. And if anybody we met recently with the Director General of Women and Gender Equality Canada. We met also with the Executive Deputy Minister of the province. And I think what you have said about we need to make our voices known, we need to do that, and we need to do it collectively. If any of you would like to join us on that, it is open and welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our panelists who responded to the invitation. You have been so generous with your time and your wisdom. We hope to see you all next time.
Thank you, Sue. Good job, Sue.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm sad it's over, but I'm glad we're leaving something.
If our organizing team wants to stay on for another minute, then we can. Just for
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
I'm heading back to the Senate.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
That would be a stretch.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking time out to be with us.
Thanks.
Enjoyed it. I was only